All right, in this session, we're going to learn how to make bottle toppers, wine bottle toppers, using a couple of different methods to hold your piece. In the past, we've used chucks and we've used just between centers. Today, we're going to use what some companies call mandrel or a chuck. They call it a bottle topper chuck. It depends on the manufacturer. But this is the device that we'll be using to hold our piece to turn the bottle topper. In addition, if you want to make a bottle topper using a cork and a dowel, we will show you how that's done using a collet type system to hold your workpiece. All right, as usual, the first step is to find center. In this case, we only need to find one. And then depending on the type of topper you're making, if you want to use a metal stopper, then you want to drill a 11/32 hole about 3/4 of an inch deep, maybe just a hair longer, so that any glue that's forced down in will have some airspace in the bottom. If you're going to use a cork, you want to drill a hole at 23/64. The reason for that is you buy 3/8 dowels. They're not always 3/8 exactly. So we found that drilling them 23/64, you have a little bit extra or a little tighter fit. And when you glue them in, you don't have to worry about them turning on you, all right? All right, I'm using an 11/32 drill bit because it's a soft wood and that works fairly well with the mandrel that we're going to use. On harder woods, you may want to drill the hole just slightly larger. What you want to do is take a test piece and try it and see how easily or how hard it threads onto the mandrel. All right, so I have this marked at 3/4 of an inch, or if you like, you can set the depth of your drill so that it's kind of automatic, especially if you're doing more than one. You can set that depth up and just go to the same one every time. Now I have that set about 3/4 of an inch. I've checked the speed already, and just go ahead and drill my hole. That's it, now we're off to the lathe. All right, the mandrels, or chucks, whatever you want to call these things, but these are designed or made for lathes that have a 1" 8 thread per inch shaft. On the larger lathes, we have 1¼ inch 8 threads per inch shaft, so we need an adapter. That's threaded 1¼ inch 8 threads per inch for the larger shafts, and it's reduced down to 1" by 8 threads an inch for the smaller lathes, and we just attach one to the other. All right, and then we mount it on the lathe. We do have the tap available. Again, it's a simple setup. This will tap the threads into your piece. It's awful good. It works well on acrylics or very hard woods. On the softer woods, I usually don't bother with it. I can cut the threads well enough just using the adapter here, okay? Or using the mandrel, and that's what we do. You have to be careful when you start this. Try and start it up square. Once you feel that the threads start to bite into the wood, go ahead and screw it on, all right? Once you have it threaded on, you want to go ahead and take it off. And you want to repeat that 2 or 3 times. The reason for that is there's some friction buildup, and what happens when things heat up? They expand. And it may become difficult, very difficult, for you to get your workpiece off when you're finished. All right, there's an alternative way to hold your piece, especially if you want to do kind of inexpensive and you want to use corks and dowels. Actually, it's one of the ways that I learned before they came out with all these metal bottle toppers. It was primarily corks. So as I mentioned before, if you want to use a dowel, you have to drill a 23/64 hole. About 1 inch deep is good. You use a bit of CA glue and drive it in using the CA glue, and you can use either an accelerator or just let it sit 5 or 10 minutes, and then it's hard enough to go ahead and use. If you prefer regular wood glue, you want to drill these and make your blanks up the night before and let them sit overnight before you turn them. And the way you want to hold these, we have a collet system. We have a set here, 3/8, 1/2 inch, 5/8, 3/4. And this is the housing for it. Now this is already threaded for 1¼ inch 8 for the larger lathes. It comes with its own adapter if you want to use it on one of the mini lathes. So 1 inch 8 adapter, you can screw in and use it on the mini lathes. All right, and the method of attaching your dowel, first we attach that to the lathe, and then using the 3/8 collet, you go ahead and mount that in there and put it on the base. And then these two rods you use to tighten up. And then you're good to go. You're ready to turn. Okay, that's the mounting of the piece. Now we're ready to turn it. All right, first thing we want to do is, as usual, get it round. Make your piece round. All right, piece is round. Next step is to form the hat band, which is this in here. The brim is already formed by making it round. So the next step is the hat band. And to do that, we just take the diamond parting tool, 1/4 inch, and with this we make a mark in about 1/8 inch, and then come in and just go ahead and cut down, about 1/4, 3/8 inch. All right, just so it looks like the brim of a hat. The next thing we want to do is at the where we ended the cut, we want to come down now and finish off the top of the hat band. And by doing that, we just cut in again with the parting tool and just go in maybe 1/16 inch or so and stop. Next step is just a very basic taper going from the top of the piece right down to that hat band. And we want to taper it a little at a time, take a little off, and just come in and just slightly deeper than the top of that hat band. Clean it up, get a nice sharp edge, and stop right there. Okay, this blank was a little bit narrow, so in forming the top of the hat, it's a bit out of proportion, so I'm just going to shorten it up a little bit. I'm going to take my parting tool here, and right about there, we're going to call that the top of the hat. And I'm just going to go ahead and just part this off. Now, for a lot of experienced turners, they can form the top of the hat and they'll work the tool right from the tool rest here. But for beginners, or if you're not that experienced, my suggestion, and it's a good practice anyway, to have your tool rest parallel to the direction of your cut. It just makes it that much easier. And its anchor, I'm going to start get my bevel on the workpiece and just come around and form a little crown on the top of the hat. Little roundness, not much. End up in the center. That's it. All right. This is going to take a little bit of sanding. It's on the bevel. It's fairly smooth, so about 700 RPMs or so. If you like sanding, then Go ahead and you can do this whole thing with a scraper, but I don't like sanding, so, and I just want to get the back end of this a bit too. That's it. Fairly recently on the market, they've come out and are promoting more and more use of acrylics. You can get acrylics in different designs, different shapes. If you're going to be doing bottle toppers, you'll get a block, something like this. Now you can get this individual, just about 2 inches long or 6 inches long. And some companies have them up to, you can get them special or up to a foot long. All right, if you have a lathe at home and you're not in a production mode and you have all the time that you need, you can put various finishes on the lathe and leave them on the lathe until they're dry. Here, well, we can't tie up a lathe that long, so there's very few things that we can do on the lathe. One of the things we use is what's known as friction polish. It's actually a mixture of shellac and wax. Some different companies formulate them a little bit differently. When you're finishing on a lathe, first and foremost, you want to protect your rails. If you don't, and your finish dries on there, then you have problems moving your banjo and tailstock back and forth. The second consideration is never use a rag when you're applying finish or buffing. Always use paper towel. If you use a rag and you get a piece of thread caught, it can pull the rag and your fingers in. So to be safe, you want to use just a little square of paper towel. And I found it best to apply the finish liberally without the lathe turning. All right, you want to turn it by hand. And the reason I say that, we had a gentleman here a few years ago. He didn't like this finish because he said to me, he said, every time I use it, he said, I get streaks, I get lines in my finish. And my first question was, how are you applying it? He said, well, I turn the lathe on and I go ahead and put the finish on, and it always comes out kind of streaky, raised. And the reason for that is, they call this friction polish, and the wax is in it, because when you do buff this up, it finishes it, it fairly well dries it, but it brings the wax up and then it shines it. Now I have that applied while I have the damp cloth yet, or the paper towel. I'm going to go ahead and bring my speed up 2200, 2300 RPMs or so, and then I'm going to use the rag to buff this up and apply it and let it warm up. The friction will go ahead and bring the wax out and begin to cure it, and it'll come out a bit shiny. Now this is kind of this is poplar, and it's a light color wood, and probably the camera's not catching the contrast, the difference already in the finish and the sheen. On darker woods, it's a little more evident. And there it is, all finished up. Okay, so this is good and dry. We're ready to take it off now. Just unscrew it. Go ahead and put our bottle topper, or attach our bottle topper to the top. And a lot of these metal bottle toppers, they come with like a stud. They're threaded differently. And what I like to do, if I have these that come apart, sometimes you get them and they're all solid one piece. But if they're separate like this, when I assemble them, I put a little drop of glue or epoxy in there so that this portion doesn't come out And if you have to clean it, you could just unscrew the stopper itself from the base or from the top and leave that in your piece. To assemble it, all I'm going to do now is just screw this in. There it is, completed, ready to go. Okay, that's it for this week. We've had a lot of fun this evening making wine toppers. We've learned a different way to hold your workpiece. We've used the drill press instead of the lathe. And come on in this week, practice what you've learned, try different techniques. Plus we've introduced you a little bit to different materials and some finishing techniques. So again, enjoy your turning, come in during the week, practice, and we'll see you next time.